So good morning, everybody. And hello and welcome to Walk the Talk, the webcast where you walk if you want to, while we're doing the talking. So we don't want to be adding to your virtual fatigue at the moment. So if you're up for it, you could plug your earphones in and listen while you take us on a walk, whether that's around the house or around the block. Use the next 45 minutes to move your body and nourish your mind. So I'm Sarah and I'm one of the co-founders and coaches at Point 3 Wellbeing, and I will be hosting today's Walk the Talk. And this is the next in our series aimed at HR professionals, business leaders, and those interested in mental health and well-being of people in the workplace. And I'm delighted today to be chatting to Dan Strachan. So Dan is Crisis Recovery Service Coordinator at Richmond Borough Mind Charity. And in Dan's own words, Richmond Borough Mind is a wonderful organisation that goes above and beyond supporting those facing both short and long-term mental health challenges. So a little bit about Dan and his role for Mind Charity, and I will ask Dan to, of course, expand on this, but he first got in touch with them in early 2017 when his own mental health was in a severe state. And we will hear from Dan how it started with a simple phone call: "I need help." And it was Richmond Borough Mind that where Dan's own recovery began, by involving himself with others who had a deeper level of understanding and valuable advice to improve his own well-being. And his confidence grew, and subsequently he wanted to give back to the organisation that had assisted him during such a turbulent time of his life. So he started to assist with running the groups and now works full-time for the organisation. And it's a pleasure to be chatting to Dan, as our paths have crossed a number of times over the past few years at Point 3 events. And before we get on to the conversation, why have we chosen to talk about stress and the associated stigma surrounding stress in the workplace? Well, April is Stress Awareness Month. So this is an opportunity to raise awareness in the subject of stress in the workplace and to help bust the stigma that prevents so many from going on to get help, encouraging people to do what Dan did and to ask for help. And the Stress Management Society recently collaborated with Huawei App Gallery to conduct a study on stress as part of Stress Awareness Month. And they gathered data from 2,000 British adults. And the research identified that, unsurprisingly, 65% of people in the UK have felt more stressed since COVID-19 restrictions began in March last year. And the three main causes for concern are feelings of disconnection, uncertainty, and a worrying loss of control. And stigma is the main reason that holds people back from moving from minimum mental well-being to maximum well-being. And there are some staggering statistics around stress, mental ill health, and stigma. 1 in 5 people take a day off due to stress, yet 90% of those cited a different reason for doing so. Why? Well, likely to be the associated stigma. And 60% said that stigma and discrimination are as or more damaging than the symptoms of their mental health condition. And less than half of employees say they would feel able to talk to their line manager openly if they were suffering from stress. So coming to you, Dan, and welcome. If you could turn your camera on, it would be lovely to see you. So as someone who has their own story of mental ill health, could you talk to us about your own personal experience and how stigma impacted you personally, if at all?
Sure. Thank you, Sarah. And first of all, thank you for inviting me here today to speak. It's a real pleasure. Yeah, so just a little bit in a nutshell, a bit about my background. I grew up as someone who didn't know anything about mental health or what mental health illness was or mental health problems were. And one of my first jobs out of university, I struggled with it. I really, really did. I struggled to identify the signs and symptoms of stress, which unfortunately things like long-term stress lead to things like depression and anxiety, which I certainly experienced as well. Inside the workplace where I was, nobody talked about feelings, nobody talked about emotions. The culture was very much stiff upper lip, get on with it, pull your socks up. You know, we're all stressed, we're all tired. This is a mutual feeling. And because of this kind of culture in the workplace, I didn't open up. I didn't talk about how I felt. I didn't talk about the symptoms of stress that I was feeling. And because I was just outside of university, I had this real desire to actually um, prove who I was and prove that I could handle this. I didn't want to show any signs of weakness at all. As someone who's had a really strong work ethic, um, it was not something I was willing to admit. Admitting that would have been a sign of weakness in my books anyway. I didn't know who to talk to because the workplace didn't have any conversations about mental health. I didn't know who to speak to. It's not something my colleagues spoke to, so I couldn't even really have those water cooler conversations, as I talk, as I call them. And I started to think a lot of negative things about myself. I started to think that I was actually lazy, not good enough, not as good as what I thought I was. And all of these things actually compounded and contributed to the problem. Unfortunately, it became so severe that physically my body just shut down. Mental health problems actually present themselves quite physically. There's quite a misunderstanding around that, but it's interesting how stress can present itself in such a physical manner that I couldn't even get out of bed. I could barely move my body. It was very, very distressing. I realized that I needed help. And this was a big step for me because, in my book, as I mentioned, reaching out for help was a sign of weakness. I couldn't have been more wrong. Reaching out was a sign of strength and real deeper insight as to what I needed. And as you mentioned, Sarah, it started with one phone call to Richmond Borough Mind. They provided such I can't even really put it into words, really, but such amazing help and support, being able to reach out, talk to others who really truly understood even the weirder signs and symptoms. And I loved it so much that I decided to stay. I ended up volunteering, running groups, giving back, especially as I started to recover and feel a bit better in myself. Employment came up and I absolutely just jumped at the chance to take a job. I started with kind of ad hoc work, doing outreach training, eventually working my way up to crisis recovery hub service coordinator. So I'm quite proud of myself. That's my journey in a nutshell, Sarah.
Oh, thank you so much, Dan, for sharing that. It's very inspiring, I must say, and it's a great opportunity for people to kind of relate to your story, if you like. So moving on. The subject of this webcast is around busting that stigma in the workplace. You talked about your own kind of pressures of not wanting to appear weak, and this sort of culture of everyone's feeling stressed, so just get on with it, pull your socks up. But we want to try and break down this stigma and normalize the conversation around stress, because as we can see from your own story, we want to prevent as much as possible people going into more severe mental ill health, and make sure that people get the support that they can access. So let's explore this a little bit more. We've talked before about how often we say we're fine when we're not. I think on average, we ask someone, how are you, 14 times a day. So we say fine 14 times a day on average. And often if we, even when we are perhaps not feeling fine, and never more so than in the workplace. And of course, stigma plays such a part in this. What can we as individuals do to start changing this so that people can access the help as early as possible?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And to put it pure and simply, talk about it. I can't express this, more passionately. I got the help that I needed through talking about it. And ultimately, I feel that our emotions are expressed so much in the words that we speak. Um, and 1 in 4 people are going to experience a mental health problem in any 1 year. That's a mental health problem that that's warranted of a diagnosis and treatment. 25% of the population. Um, it doesn't make it okay, but I think we can agree, therefore, that mental health problems are pretty normal. Wow, pretty normal. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about it like it is normal. It's not something to sweep under the rug. It's not something to shy away from or avoid, which it traditionally has been. I think a lot of the stigma comes around people who struggle with their mental health being associated with nutcases, being psycho, the old kind of asylums, being locked away and things like that, which is it's totally not true. It's really, really not. So we need to encourage conversations about these things. We we need to kind of just avoid the usual, how are you? I'm fine. How are you? Can't complain, which are very British responses to the question, how are you? So it's really important to ask twice. It really, really is. I think that that's one of my motto, really. How are you? How are you really? I'm very interested to know what's going on in your life. And you could probably uncover a lot more things below the surface in individuals. People will be able to actually express themselves and maybe even discover themselves that, hey, actually, maybe I'm not doing so well. And if we talk about these things, we'll know better on how to get the right help and support. We'll be able to speak to people about where to go, who to speak to. Getting professional help is a sign of strength, not weakness. So that's the main thing about busting down the stigma, really. We need to talk about it like it's normal.
I know, it sounds so simple, doesn't it?
So simple, but in practice, hey, it's a challenge. We got a lot of work to do.
It does, because I suppose it's getting comfortable with having those uncomfortable conversations.
Yeah, and I think that they're only uncomfortable at the moment just because of how traditionally they're viewed.
Yes.
I mean, we've become comfortable talking about so many aspects of life that used to be taboo, like, LGBT and things like that. And, it's got to be the same for mental health. We need to be comfortable talking about these things.
Absolutely. So we do have a lot of business leaders and HR professionals who will be watching this. What do you think organisations can do to encourage people to talk more openly about mental health in the workplace?
Well, first of all, I really believe that they should actually take a responsibility to observe some key dates and times in the calendar.
Mhm.
April being Stress Awareness Month, fantastic, great opportunity to talk that, as well as we got Time to Talk Day as well, which happens in February. I think it's the 4th of February as well. Just a day for everybody to think about themselves, their mental health, and to actually talk about it. So there's lots of things that HR people can do, managers can do to encourage these conversations. Like I said, it's okay to ask twice. And also, I kind of came up with this idea is create a one-to-one environment that's a bit more centered about the person instead of work. I know one-to-ones can always be about the work management and things like that. But if we actually create a balance of work-life balance in that one-to-one meeting, we can understand a bit more about the person holistically, what makes up that person in terms of work, but also their home life as well. We know that home life can impact work in many ways. You know, if your home life, your personal life is okay, your work life is okay. And it works both ways. You know, if you struggle in your home life, quite often you can struggle in the workplace as well. So let's focus more on the person. Let's create this an environment where people feel comfortable to talk a little bit more about their personal lives, because in that way they can receive more support and a bit more compassionate support as well. There's other things as well. I know Richmond Borough Mind, we do our own wellness action plans. So each individual has a set list of questions that they fill out and hand them to their line managers. So their line managers know what to do when their colleagues or the people they manage are finding themselves struggling and stressed. It will lay out really simple questions. It will say, what are the signs and symptoms that you are struggling? For everybody, it's individual. It's not a one size fits all. So it gives them an opportunity to think about themselves. What are the signs and symptoms that I am struggling with stress or anxiety or even depression? It's got other great questions as well. It's like, what keeps me well in the workplace? What keeps me well at home? What are my coping mechanisms? Who do I speak to when things become challenging? What can I do to alleviate some of this stress? So this already creates some kind of framework that you can go to when times get hard, because we know when times get hard, it can be very difficult to concentrate, and it's very difficult to know even where to start. So starting with those wellness action plans can be a great place to look to. But yeah, I think that those are just some really simple yet very effective tips.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, I think, as you say, to have this, promote this sort of culture where it's okay to bring your whole self into the workplace. It's a relatively new concept, isn't it? Because I certainly remember that time where we were told to leave our personal lives at the door when we went to the workplace. But thankfully, there is definitely a shift, and the more you can get to know someone, the more you can support them, but also spot the signs when something or someone is struggling. And we will come to talk about that in a moment. One of the favourite exercises that we run in our mental health awareness training is we get our delegates to consider one idea that could help bust mental health stigma inside their team or organization, and we always get lots of great kind of suggestions, but I'd say probably there are three of kind of really popular ones that always come up, and the first is, and it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on this, Dan, is hearing senior leaders talking about their experiences of stress or mental ill health. Obviously, it's really inspiring to listen to you and to have heard from you about your experiences. Again, if we can see and hear from our senior leaders who, if they're leading by example and showing that they feel comfortable being vulnerable, if you like, then the ripple effects will be felt through the organization. The other two, and before I come to you just to get your thoughts on that, is making mental health awareness training available to all, because again, there's just this lack of knowledge really, and that will help. But also then, and you've mentioned this, sort of regular opportunities and forums to talk openly about mental health, and to normalise the conversation. Any thoughts on these three themes?
I absolutely love all of those themes, and I just kind of wanted to pick up what you said earlier in terms of the workplace. We spend so much of our time in the workplace, and we see more of our colleagues and the workspace than we do our own homes sometimes. Maybe not true over the last year, but that's a matter of fact. And I genuinely believe that we have what I like to call our work families as well. Families are supposed to be people that we're really open about, our emotions and things like that. So if we can have those emotional conversations with our colleagues, it's going to support our mental health much, much better. We're going to have easier conversations about it. I think that's the key word, easier conversations. But yeah, senior leaders talking about their mental health struggles as well. is so empowering to everyone. I think traditionally your managers, senior people are these people that have this kind of macho bravado, or these people in kind of powerful positions that can't be broken, almost kind of robotic behavior. You know, they can handle everything. But to realize that they're actually human as well, they have a responsibility to normalize these kind of things. So I think those are, yeah, fantastic ideas. And something that I'd like to add as well is that when you say this kind of open forum to talk about your mental health, there are opportunities to do that nearly all the time in the workplace. What we do at Richmond Borough Mind is every meeting that we do, we go around the table and we do a simple check-in. How are you? How has your week been? Yeah, it's been all right. Had a good week, not a great week, feeling frazzled today, feeling quite down this week. You get this multitude of different kind of answers and replies. And, you know, when you hear one person go, I've been feeling quite down this week, you suddenly think to yourself, oh, actually, yeah, no, I've been really struggling as well. And it gives you an opportunity to think about that. We've normalized the conversation just in those few moments before the meeting. And yeah, there's loads of opportunities to kind of do that thing.
I guess it's promoting that sort of psychological safety, that it's okay to admit how you're feeling, whether it's up or down. There's no right or wrong. It is having that the sort of the compassion and understanding and respect of each other's.
Totally, yeah.
And that recognition of your own emotion, because again, that can be hard, can't it, to really tune in and know how you are feeling if you're not used to doing it.
Yeah, completely. And I think kind of like when you actually admit out in the open kind of how you're feeling, what we were talking about earlier, Sarah, is that sometimes when you open up a little bit, it takes a bit of weight off your shoulders. It really does. And when we had a quick catch up before the meeting, Sarah, I admitted that I've had a couple of stressful days. I'm feeling a bit frazzled. And just by saying that, I felt a pressure lifting off my shoulders. I felt like, hey, you know, Sarah knows that I've been struggling a little bit. You know, she understands that compassion is important, and you know, she's just aware of how I'm feeling. And sometimes that is enough to relieve a lot of stress.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think, Dan, that there's more work to be done around managing stress and mental health, particularly for men, given that we know, sadly, the statistics at the crisis end of mental ill health, suicide, for example, it is much higher, and there's this sort of culture, isn't there? Or perhaps there isn't. Be lovely to hear from you, that, you know, men don't open up as much. What's your thoughts there?
Uh, yeah, totally. So there is a lot of work to be done. There really is. I think that we've scratched the surface. We've sort of broken the surface layer, and we are talking about it a lot more. And I think that the issue in the workplace is that managers, senior people are open to listening to people about their concerns, their stress, their mental health problems, but then it stops there. You know, they'll take it on board, and it's almost like you get the feeling of, yeah, you know, I've spoken about it, but now I just have to get on with it. Nothing seems to have changed. Nothing seems to have been implemented to manage my workflow. So yeah, a lot needs to be done kind of on the ground level of managing workflow, especially at a time that you are struggling. Actually implementing those wellness action plans, actually implementing practical steps to make that person's time a little bit more stress free, because it's a downward spiral. The more stressed you get, the productivity declines as well, and you'll find yourself swimming headfirst up a waterfall. That's kind of what I describe it. And yeah, things do need to be done. You need to kind of think about your work culture. Is there kind of a culture where overwork is you know, cultivated, and is that burning people out? That really needs to be looked into. You need to kind of look into the ground level of what is being said, what do people think, what are the perceived expectations on people as well. In terms of men as well, women are more likely to struggle with their mental health, but men, unfortunately, are more likely to engage in more destructive behaviors in terms of self-harm and, unfortunately, suicide as well. So there's a lot of work to be done in normalizing mental health problems, emotional problems in men as well. I did a talk with the Metropolitan Police a couple of years ago, actually, and I did my normal check-ins. I asked how everybody was, and there was this one police officer covered in tattoos, macho built, ripped dude. He was a monster. He looked like a frightening guy, and he said, you know, when things get to me, I just like to have a good cry about everything. And oh, I wanted to give him a hug. I was like, thank you so much for saying that. That is incredible. That was, you know, I just didn't expect that kind of thing from me. And that was my own assumption, you know, that showed that maybe I need to kind of work on my assumptions there. But yeah, just someone like that talking about their emotions and how they respond emotionally as well. It's really kind of leading the way for men to talk more openly about their mental health. So therefore, it's the same with senior managers as well. If they can talk about stress, their own mental health issues, and that's going to be 1 in 4 of you guys. It really is, you know, then you can lead by example.
Yeah, something that does come up. I mean, you mentioned burnout there, and managing kind of workflow, so that it doesn't become overwhelming. Something that comes up often in our mental health awareness workshops is that people don't know necessarily how to spot the signs of stress or burnout or mental ill health, particularly in the remote world that we're living in at the moment. What advice would you give here to managers or colleagues to help them spot the signs in their peers?
Yeah, I think over the last year, we're going to eventually see the phrase Zoom fatigue appear in the dictionary. Yeah, there are some really, really sneaky, subtle signs and symptoms that you are struggling that sometimes you don't even realize are happening. A lot of the time, it is your colleagues, your friends, your family who will notice these things even before you do. As I mentioned earlier with my story, I genuinely thought when I was struggling, I was just being lazy. Well, hang on, is that statement true? Am I a lazy person? No. Why am I labeling myself that? That's not it. So some of those signs and symptoms can actually be those negative thoughts, those thoughts that you know inherently, rationally are not true, but they're starting to creep in. That can be one of the first signs that stress is overtaking, and even anxiety and depression is starting to kind of take over. For me, everybody's signs and symptoms are different, but for me, some of the sneaky ones was that my concentration and memory were way off, way off. That is not something that I traditionally struggled with before, but for some reason, I struggled to remember what had happened in meetings. I struggled to focus for probably even longer than a few minutes was a real challenge. Signs and symptoms to spot in other people. Are there changes in personality? Are there subtle changes in personality? Are there changes in their appearance? You know, do they not seem the same as they usually are? And I think a lot of us kind of just disregard that as they must be just having an off day or something like that. No, I think that those are really good opportunities to open a conversation and ask twice, are you okay? It's absolutely fine. I genuinely believe to ask people, hey, I've noticed this kind of thing with you. Are you all right? It just doesn't seem like your usual self. I know you, and that just seems to be, you know, something that's a bit off with you. You'll get 1 of 2 replies. You'll get someone who'll be like, just having an off day. Or you might get someone to go, actually, no, I've been struggling in the last few days. And then great, we've got an opportunity to speak there. We've got an opportunity to help and support and maybe signpost to professional help. So yeah, some of the few sneaky signs and symptoms.
Yeah, that's great and really encouraging to hear, because often, you might spot the signs, but you perhaps might not broach the conversation for fear of saying something wrong, or not knowing how to help, because particularly in the workplace, we're all we're all problem solvers. We want to fix other people's problems. We're so solutions focused, so that can hold people back from asking or opening a conversation.
Yeah, totally. I think a lot of people are worried about approaching the conversation because they're really worried about saying the wrong things. And I always tell people saying nothing is worse than saying the wrong thing. We're all human, we're all going to make slip ups. I've been working in our crisis support center for, well, over the last year as a support worker and coordinator. I say the wrong things all the time. I'm getting better at it, but I do slip up every now and again, and I am human. I'm learning, and sometimes it's different for everybody. People respond in different ways. Some people are okay with the way that you approach mental health, whereas someone else might actually be a bit like, oh, no, that doesn't sit well with me. That doesn't resonate with me. But that's just okay. Recognizing people are going to respond in different ways is all right. Just a few key tips, which I'm totally guilty of violating. Try and be non-judgmental. Problems are subjective. One person might cope with a particular problem extremely well, whilst another person, it could break them. It might cause them burnout. Just because one person can deal with it doesn't mean another person can deal with it. I think that there is an assumption that just because the problem doesn't affect you, therefore it shouldn't affect anybody else. Well, that's entirely wrong. People take and deal with problems in lots of different ways. Another thing as well is a bit ironic because I talk a lot about myself, but when you are talking to someone about their issues and their problems, try and not make it about yourself. It's very easy to kind of lead yourself into a conversation where you go, oh, that reminds me of the time I did this and I did that and I felt this and that and I did this and actually it was no big deal and things like that. I think sometimes that's okay, especially if the person is really responsive to hearing about your experience. But sometimes, especially if someone's in a real crisis situation or at the point of burnout, hearing all about kind of your problems is not necessarily going to help them so much. They actually might feel a bit alienated or a bit unheard. So just something to be a little bit careful about. Am I talking a little bit too much about myself? Am I actually being a little bit judgmental about their problems? So just a few key things to identify.
That's interesting, because there's a fine line. We want to be empathetic, and so we want to kind of show perhaps that we empathize. We've been there, maybe we do want to sort of tap into that feeling so that we can feel with someone, because that will help build that connection. But yes, it is a fine line, isn't it, between,
it's a balance.
Yeah, making it all about you rather than them. You want to encourage them to open up more rather than to close off.
Yeah, definitely. I've had an experience in the past where I've spoken to a manager in a previous job a while back, and I presented a problem to them, and how I felt about the problem. And then the rest of the meeting was him talking all about himself. And so there was no time for my voice to be heard. I didn't feel like I managed to get off my chest how I really felt or explore those emotions. So it's finding the balance. It's a two-way conversation. It's a dialogue.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am going to open it up to questions from the audience at this point. So if anyone does have any questions, please do drop them into the Q&A. And meanwhile, whilst people perhaps are typing their questions away, we've covered quite a bit, Dan, already. And perhaps you could summarize, what are sort of the guiding pointers you can give to HR professionals, to people managers or business leaders listening to this webcast when it comes to busting stigma in the workplace around stress, around burnout, around mental ill health?
Yeah, absolutely. If you haven't done it already, it's really good to start thinking and implementing some kind of framework about mental health or a mental health policy that is genuinely compassionate. It's interesting how many people I speak to, and there's no policy in place for mental health. It's if you're struggling, it's just sick days that you use. We need to do a bit more than that. We need to do a bit more than just, well, if you're feeling sick or you're burnt out, just use your sick days. It's like, no, well, actually a lot of people wants to actually be in work. They want to do it. That workload needs to be managed, because if they come back from their sick leave, the same amount of work is probably going to be in their desk, and you're going to be in this everlasting cycle, really. This boom and bust cycle that I see so often. So yeah, start really thinking about a mental health policy, a mental health framework that includes wellness action plans. And I think it would be a really good idea to start thinking about having a mental health champion or a mental health lead, someone who's had mental health first aid training, someone who's even had their own experience of mental health problems. I'm sure that if you dig deep enough, well, 1 in 4, you're going to find someone who's actually quite open and honest about their mental health problems. And maybe that they would absolutely love to jump at the chance to be that mental health lead in the workplace. Maybe someone who could organize drop-ins, a confidential space to talk about their home life, their emotional issues and things like that. Kind of get it off your chest sessions could be really helpful. And like you said before, get those senior leaders talking about mental health.
That's brilliant. Okay, we've had one question come in through the chat function, and there's one on the Q&A. So let's go to the chat first. Have you had an experience of a manager who has been a great support to you? And if so, what did they do that was helpful? Ooh, good question.
Oh, yes, I have had. Honestly, I couldn't speak more highly of the manager that I have at the moment. They are absolutely fantastic. We often do sort of pre-briefs and debriefs, especially at work at the start of the day. We will have a chat about how we're feeling this morning. How did you sleep last night? How lively are you this morning, just so that we can kind of gauge how people are kind of feeling to start off with the day. And I think that helps us to kind of manage the workflow through the day as well, and maybe pick up a little bit of support where another person is struggling. Maybe we can balance the workflow a little bit better. We also have debriefs at the end of the day. Hey, what affected you most today? Have you got any concerns? And that's helps us to kind of offload before we go home. We don't want people to kind of sleep on it, because it can be so disruptive if there are any concerns. We don't want people to kind of take that home with them. So debriefing is a really important part. She gives me time to speak. She gives me time to express myself, no matter how small the issue and the problem is. She says, there's no problem too great or too small that we can't talk about. And we have that kind of professional, working yet compassionate and sometimes gentle relationship that is so important. So yeah, there are times when I've admitted in the workplace that I am struggling. My concentration is off. I am nowhere near optimal performance at the moment. And I have taken time off, and she does check-ins, and she asks, how would you like me to check in? Because I don't want to be overbearing, but I want to keep up with how things are. So she'll either send me a text and just be like, is it okay to call you a bit later? Sometimes it's yes, sometimes it's no. If it's no, no offense taken. And it's finding that kind of balance that really works, but concentrating on those really important small details.
That's really interesting. I think we've heard that a lot, that a lot of managers have taken on a greater role, particularly in the last year, because to look after the mental health and well-being of their teams, and to do more of those check-ins, because perhaps that would have been done by others, or just generally the culture of being in a workplace would have given more people the opportunity to talk. So there has been more responsibility that's sort of landed on the shoulders of managers over the last 12 months. We have had another question in from Alicia. Thank you for sharing your story, Dan. I'm an HR professional and sometimes find that sending someone who is struggling an email with EAP details, so employee assistance program details, isn't always helpful. How do we change the culture of doing more than just pointing the employee towards employee assistance programs?
Wow, that's a really, really good question, actually. I'll think about that one a
Well, while
little
you
bit.
think, what I'm just going to say is that often we do talk about employee assistance programs. So in our training, that often they are the sort of the best kept secrets within organizations. So whilst I can, yes, see that from an HR perspective, you don't want to just be, it feels like you're kind of passing the buck or responsibility onto someone else by sending those details. Actually, you know, they are great resources, and they're often, as I say, the best kept secret that people don't really know is available to them. But yes, I can see Alicia's point.
I would say I think that try not to jump too quickly into hey, here's all the support, you know, go off and do that. I think that there's got to be a certain element of rapport building beforehand, especially rapport building in that person's current stress circumstance. I think that just message them being, hey, how are you? I'm just checking in. I want to know how things are for you. And then just checking out their reply, gauging their replies. And then you'll know when the time is right to signpost them to those EAPs and other professional services as well. I think it's just managing that quite carefully. And you're never going to get it right. You're never going to get it perfectly right in those kind of situations. I admit that I make mistakes all the time.
Yeah, no, well, absolutely. We're human after all.
Yeah.
So we are coming to the end of the conversation, and gosh, I could keep chatting to you for much longer. We have got one more question, which is quite a big one. So let's see if we can cover it off in the time that we have available. So, and thank you, Kim, for sharing this. So having worked for 2 US companies who implemented the 10-80-10 reward scheme that was incredibly destructive, this led to personal and staff burnout. How do we challenge the productivity versus human-centered policies? As this is a big challenge facing people working in large corporate businesses. Yes,
wow, brilliant question. We could have a whole entire seminar lecture on that alone. But when it comes down to it, I'm not sure if you would find this helpful at all, but I find the 3 Ps work so well: praise, promotes, productivity. And there's simply not enough of that in the workplace. I think a lot of the time, especially a lot of kind of like the traditional style management, it's kind of all about cracking the whip. It's, you know, people are kind of more willing, senior managers willing to jump on, you know, what hasn't been done instead of what has been done, what is still left to do instead of what has been done. Praise promotes productivity. It really does. I know in the workplace that, you know, just a simple, you know, thank you, that was a really good job you did. I understand that was really, really tough for you. It makes me think that, oh yeah, you know, I'm feeling quite stressed, I'm feeling quite down, but that actually kind of gave me the motivation and confidence I need to continue. There are a lot of things that could have been worked on in my performance, but hey, you know, let's talk about that another time. But yeah, I'm sorry that's probably not as in depth or
tease, it feels very appropriate. So thank you. Okay, so one question that we like to ask, or we like to finish our webcasts with, is how do you walk the talk when it comes to managing your well-being? What are 3 things that you prioritize to optimize your well-being, Dan? And perhaps maybe over the last 12 months?
Yeah, I'm still learning to try and practice what I preach. I'm definitely guilty of that. But over the last year, um, 3 things. Well, I think, and I've been telling a lot of people over the last year, that it's okay just to survive, especially over the last year when things are challenging, when things are really, really uncertain. It's okay just to survive. No one's expecting you to be on your optimal performance. Really, it's not an expectation especially over the last year. But when it comes to those 3 things, when I'm having a tough time, I strip it back to 3 core basic human needs: diet, sleep, and exercise, because those are the 3 things that disappear and go out of the window when times get hard. But if you can introduce and pull those things back into a nice, healthy balance, you can get back to a better, healthy position in your life. So strip it back to basics, guys. That's more than okay, and sometimes more than enough.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you, Dan, very much. Just as we come to the end of today's session, I wanted to let people know about the next Walk the Talk, which will take place on Wednesday, the 12th of May, and that happens to be during Mental Health Awareness Week. Dan was mentioning those awareness days and weeks, which are very important, and opportunities for businesses to start to normalise the conversation around mental health. And we're going to be talking to Imogen, along with our very own Nikki, who are our Mental Health First Aid England First Aid instructors. And Imogen is also a trained counsellor, and they're going to be discussing the phased return to work over the coming months and how to manage this, this time of change. So I hope you'll join us then. We will be sharing the recording of this Walk the Talk, and also the link to register for the next Walk the Talk in a follow-up email. But that just leaves me to say thank you so much, Dan. We really, really appreciate your time and your candor. Your story is very inspiring, and we love talking to you. So thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And take care, everyone. Be well, be happy, be you. And thank you for joining us today.